Here is the hard truth, stated without cruelty and without drama. Most people do not care about you the way you imagine they do. They may notice you for a moment. They may react. They may comment. They may approve or disapprove. But their attention moves on quickly, because their minds stay busy with their own needs, their own fears, their own problems, and their own priorities. That is not an insult. That is reality. And once you accept that reality, something important happens inside you. You stop begging for permission to live. You stop measuring yourself by unstable opinions. You stop offering your freedom to strangers who cannot even hold their own. The moment you stop expecting the world to care, you regain freedom. Not freedom to do anything, but freedom to do what matters. Freedom to build your character without noise. Freedom to shape your life with responsibility instead of performance. Marcus Aurelius would not tell you this to make you feel small. He would tell you this to make you steady. He wrote his private reflections not as a show, but as training. He treated the mind like a place that must be governed. He did not ask the crowd to validate his discipline. He asked his reason to approve his choices. So the message today is not cold. It is clean. If nobody truly cares about you the way you keep hoping they will, what should you focus on instead? You should focus on the one thing that stays with you in every room, in every loss, in every win, and in every silence. Your character. Because your character is the only part of you that can carry you through life without needing applause. Your character is the only part of you that does not collapse when attention disappears. Your character is the only part of you that can turn loneliness into strength, and uncertainty into calm direction. That is where Stoic philosophy becomes practical. Not as decoration. Not as a trend. As discipline. In the next minutes, you will not hear comfort. You will hear clarity. You will not hear excuses. You will hear what responsibility sounds like when it speaks in a calm voice. And by the end, you will know what to build when nobody is watching, what to protect when the world is loud, and what to train when your mind tries to drift back into weakness. Because if nobody cares, you must care. Not in an emotional way. In an intentional way. Not in public. In private. Not for attention. For freedom. That is the work. The mind receives these signals as if they were life or death, even when they are nothing more than someone's momentary mood. That creates pressure. It creates noise inside you. It creates distraction. And over time, it creates an inner weight that you carry everywhere. You start doing things for the wrong reason. You start speaking to be seen instead of speaking to be precise. You start building an image instead of building a self. And because your attention keeps drifting outward, your inner world becomes neglected. You might look fine while you feel unstable. You might seem confident while you feel dependent. You might appear disciplined while you secretly keep waiting for someone to notice. That is the trap. The trap is not that people do not care. The trap is that you keep acting like they should. And when they do not, you interpret it as rejection. You interpret it as unfairness. You interpret it as proof that something is wrong with you. But it is not proof of anything. It is simply the normal distribution of human focus. Most people carry their own problems. Most people struggle to manage their own mind. Most people do not have the capacity to truly hold your life in their attention. That is why chasing attention is such a fragile strategy. It makes your peace dependent on something that was never stable to begin with. So the first step is awareness. Awareness means you stop acting surprised when attention fades. You stop feeling injured when praise does not arrive. You stop demanding that other people treat your life like the main story. When you do that, you move from confusion to clarity. Because you finally see the real issue. It is not that people are bad. It is that your mind has been trained to outsource its value to an external crowd. And the Stoics would call that a form of slavery. Not slavery to a person. Slavery to perception. Slavery to the need to be seen. Slavery to the emotional swings that come from seeking validation. This is why this topic matters. It decides whether you live as a free person or a reactive person. It decides whether you build a life that stands on inner stability, or a life that keeps shaking whenever attention changes. And once you understand that, you can finally begin the Stoic work. Stoicism begins with a simple distinction. Some things are within your control. Some things are not. This is not a motivational idea. This is the foundation of mental clarity. When you confuse what you control, you suffer. When you see it clearly, you regain agency. You do not control what people notice. You do not control what people think. You do not control what people say. You do not control who approves, who ignores, who misunderstands, or who leaves. But you do control your choice. You control your response. You control the standard you live by. You control what you practice when nobody is clapping. That is why Stoicism is so uncomfortable for weak habits. It removes excuses. It refuses to let you. Stoicism rejects modern excuses because excuses are a way of avoiding responsibility. When you say, "I can't," without checking your discipline, you lower your standard. When you say, "This is just who I am," to protect a bad habit, you protect weakness instead of protecting growth. The Stoic does not insult himself. He does not pretend that change is effortless. He simply refuses to lie. He tells the truth. The truth is that nobody owes you attention. And because nobody owes you attention, you cannot build your identity on attention. So you build it on something stronger. You build it on reason. That is the Stoic perspective. You stop negotiating with noise and start living by a clear standard. And once that becomes your habit, you stop feeling dependent on whether the world cares. You start feeling grounded in whether you do. The illusion is simple. You believe there is an audience. You believe people are watching closely. You believe your mistakes will be remembered, your progress will be tracked, and your life will be evaluated in detail. That illusion makes you perform. It makes you hesitate. It makes you distort your own personality to fit what you think will be accepted. And the cost is integrity. Integrity means your inner values match your outer actions. Performance breaks that alignment. Performance makes you act for approval rather than for principle. That is why this illusion keeps you stuck. It trains you to do the visible thing, not the right thing. It trains you to protect your image, not your character. It trains you to chase quick reactions rather than long-term consequences. And this matters because life does not reward performance forever. Performance collapses when attention changes. Performance collapses when the crowd moves on. Performance collapses when life gets serious and nobody is available to clap for you. Character does not collapse. Character holds. When you live for approval, you make the worst trade. You trade your internal stability for external uncertainty. You trade your freedom for your reputation. You trade your growth for your comfort. Stoicism calls this out because Stoicism cares about strength. Not strength as a show, but strength as self-governance. The Stoic asks a question that destroys the illusion. What is more important, being seen as disciplined, or being disciplined? Because the moment you answer honestly, the performance begins to look useless. Approval is not a stable currency. It rises and falls based on trends, moods, and misunderstandings. Integrity is stable because it is internal. That is why the illusion of an audience creates anxiety. It makes you feel watched even when nobody is paying attention. It makes you feel judged even when nobody is thinking about you. And then you live in tension, trying to control an external narrative you never owned. The Stoic solution is not isolation. The Stoic solution is clarity. You stop needing an audience to justify your actions. You become your own witness. You make your choices by principle. That is why nobody cares becomes freedom. When you accept that the audience is mostly imagined, you stop acting for them. You start acting for your own standard. And that is the beginning of respect. Not the respect that comes from praise. The respect that comes from self-control. Because the person who does not need approval is hard to manipulate. The habit is approval-seeking. It looks harmless at first, but it slowly turns into entitlement. Entitlement means you expect recognition for effort. You expect support for pain. You expect understanding for your choices. You expect validation because you believe your struggle should be noticed. But expecting these things creates weakness because it conditions your mind to wait. Waiting is dangerous. Waiting makes you passive. Waiting makes you blame the world when you do not receive what you expected. Waiting makes you believe you cannot move without permission. This is why entitlement weakens character. It replaces responsibility with complaint. It replaces effort with expectation. It replaces discipline with emotional bargaining. Stoicism does not deny that life can be unfair. Stoicism simply refuses to let unfairness become an excuse. Because excuses do not protect you. They prolong the problem. If nobody owes you recognition, then you must learn to progress without it. If nobody owes you understanding, then you must learn to act without it. If nobody owes you rescue, then you must learn to carry your responsibility. That is not punishment. That is power. Because when you stop expecting the world to hold you, you learn to hold yourself. And once you can hold yourself, you stop being fragile. This is where language becomes important. Weakness often shows up in how people speak. They speak as if life owes them an easier path. They speak as if pain excuses lack of discipline. They speak as if being offended is proof of being right. But character speaks differently. Character speaks with ownership. Ownership says, I choose my response. Ownership says, I will not blame attention for my lack of progress. Ownership says, I will not trade my long-term consequences for short-term comfort. This matters because your life becomes what you repeatedly justify. If you justify weakness, you reinforce it. If you justify discipline, you strengthen it. Stoicism teaches you to choose your justifications carefully. Because the mind becomes what it repeats. So when the crowd does not care, you do not get bitter. You get serious. You put your attention where it creates results. You put responsibility back in your hands. And that is how growth begins. Not through applause. Through effort. Now we reach the center of the topic. If nobody truly cares about you the way you keep hoping they will, what should you focus on instead? Focus on your attention. Because attention is the doorway to everything else. Your discipline depends on attention. Your self-control depends on attention. Your language depends on attention. Your long-term consequences depend on where your mind goes when it is free to wander. If you let the world decide what you focus on, you become disordered. You become reactive. You become easy to provoke. And once your mind becomes easy to provoke, your life becomes easy to derail. Stoicism treats the mind as a place that must have boundaries. Boundaries are not only for other people. Boundaries are for your own habits. Boundaries protect your mental order. Mental order matters because without it, you cannot build anything that lasts. If your mind keeps switching directions based on external noise, you cannot develop deep character. Character requires repetition. Character requires a stable standard. Character requires the ability to stay with discomfort without needing a reaction to relieve it. This is where discipline becomes the dividing line between strength and weakness. Weakness seeks relief. Strength seeks alignment. Weakness wants to feel better immediately. Strength wants to become better steadily. Modern excuses often sound intelligent, but they function like anesthesia. They numb responsibility. They delay effort. They protect habits that lead nowhere. Stoicism rejects excuses because Stoicism respects consequence. Every choice has consequences. Every word shapes your respect. Every habit shapes your self-control. Every day shapes your long-term direction. This is why you focus on yourself. Not in a selfish way. In a strategic way. You focus on the part of your life that you can actually govern. Your mind. Your choices. Your language. Your standards. And once you do that, you start to feel something rare. Stability. You stop needing other people to care. Because you start caring in a disciplined way. You stop needing other people to validate you. Because you start validating yourself through integrity. You stop needing other people to understand you. Because you start understanding your own responsibility. That is not isolation. That is maturity. And this is where the turning point approaches, because once you see this clearly, you cannot unseen it. You cannot go back to living for reactions without feeling the cost. You begin to feel the gap between who you could be and who you are currently allowing yourself to be. And that gap creates pressure. Not pressure from the crowd. Pressure from your conscience. That is the pressure that changes people. This is the decision. You stop waiting. You stop hoping someone will notice your struggle and reward you for it. You stop acting as if being unseen is an injustice. You accept the line in the sand. If nobody cares the way you imagined, you will become the kind of person who does not need them to. Not because you hate people. Because you respect yourself. You set a standard. A standard is not a wish. It is a commitment. A standard means you act the same way whether you feel inspired or not. A standard means you keep your word even when nobody knows you made it. A standard means you choose discipline over comfort, not once, but repeatedly. And here is the truth that makes this moment powerful. The world does not decide your worth. Your behavior decides your character. Your character decides your freedom. That is the chain. And once you see the chain, you stop wasting time demanding a different world. You build a stronger self inside the world you already have. Now listen closely, because this is the custom quote. Keep it sharp. Keep it honest. When nobody cares, your discipline becomes your proof. That is the commitment. You stop speaking like a person who needs permission. You start speaking like a person who owns his choices. You stop negotiating with weakness. You start enforcing your standard. You stop telling yourself that you will change when life becomes easier. You decide that your character will change first. Because the strongest people do not wait for calm circumstances. They create calm control inside chaos. And this is where long-term consequences begin to matter more than short-term feelings. You begin to speak differently. You stop using language that softens your responsibility. You stop calling avoidance self-care when it is actually fear. You stop calling distraction rest when it is actually escape. You stop calling comfort balance when it is actually weakness. You choose honest language because honest language creates self-control. When you lie to yourself, you weaken yourself. When you speak clearly to yourself, you strengthen yourself. This is why the Stoics trained their mind daily. Not for inspiration. For discipline. So the moment you decide differently, you become dangerous in the quietest way. Not dangerous to others. Dangerous to your old habits. Because you will no longer protect them. You will no longer excuse them. You will no longer treat them like they deserve comfort. You will treat them like they deserve correction. That is the pivot. And once you pivot, everything that follows becomes simpler. Not easier. Simpler. Because you stop arguing with reality. You accept reality, then you act. Now the work becomes practical, but it stays rooted in reasoning. People suffer because they react. Reacting means something happens outside you, and your mind immediately follows it without pause. That makes your emotional state dependent on external events. And when your emotions control your behavior your dignity becomes unstable. Stoicism teaches restraint because restraint creates a pause. That pause is not weakness. That pause is power. Pause means you regain choice. Pause means you stop being dragged by instinct. Pause means you insert reason between stimulus and action. This is why control equals freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you feel like. Freedom is being able to choose even when you feel like doing something destructive. Freedom is composure. Composure does not mean you feel nothing. Composure means you do not allow feelings to govern your decisions. And this matters because your decisions are your long-term consequences. The more you train response, the less you depend on external calm. That is Stoic strength. You become steady because you govern yourself. Your language becomes cleaner. Your reactions become fewer. Your focus becomes sharp. And when you become less reactive, you become more respected. Not because you demand it, but because self-control carries weight. That is why discipline and weakness look different. Weakness reacts quickly and loudly. Discipline responds slowly and clearly. Weakness tries to win the moment. Discipline tries to win the future. So if nobody cares, focus on control. Focus on restraint. Focus on choosing your response. That is how you become unshakable without needing anyone to cheer for you. Now we return to the simplest truth. Character is built through consistency. Not through intensity. Not through emotional peaks. Consistency means you do what matters repeatedly. And repetition shapes identity. Identity matters because your identity becomes your default behavior. When you depend on motivation, you depend on a feeling. Feelings change. But discipline is not a feeling. Discipline is a process. A process means you follow your standard even when your mind tries to negotiate. This is why rejecting modern excuses matters. Excuses feel kind in the moment, but they produce weak outcomes over time. The Stoic does not insult himself, but he also does not indulge himself. He respects himself enough to train. He respects himself enough to keep his mind ordered. He respects himself enough to speak with clarity. Language shapes respect because language shapes identity. If you speak to yourself with excuses, you become excused from effort. If you speak to yourself with responsibility, you become responsible in action. That is why you must choose your inner dialogue carefully. It becomes the environment your mind lives in. And over time, that environment either strengthens you or weakens you. So discipline becomes identity when you stop treating it like a temporary push and start treating it like a standard you live by. And when discipline becomes identity, the world's lack of care stops mattering. Because you no longer depend on being noticed. You depend on being aligned. Now we close the circle. The opening hard truth was about attention. Most people do not care about you the way you imagine. And once you accept that reality, you stop living as a performance. You stop living as a request for approval. You stop living like your worth depends on being seen. You begin living with quiet strength. Quiet strength means you do not need to announce your discipline. You do not need to advertise your growth. You do not need to argue for your value. You build it. You live it. You protect it. Self-respect is the only respect that stays. Because self-respect cannot be taken by someone's opinion. It cannot be removed by someone's misunderstanding. It cannot be destroyed by someone's lack of attention. Self-respect grows through internal standard. An internal standard means you decide who you are before the world responds. You decide your behavior before the mood changes. You decide your discipline before life challenges you. And that is why tomorrow matters. Because tomorrow will test whether you meant what you understood today. The Stoics did not chase attention. They chased virtue. They chased clarity. They chased the calm strength of a mind that belongs to itself. So if nobody cares, focus on yourself. Focus on your character. Focus on your language. Focus on your self-control. Focus on the long-term consequences of what you choose when nobody is watching. And keep it simple. 3 lines to carry with you. You do not need applause to build discipline. You do not need approval to keep your standard. You only need responsibility to become free. And if this message helped you, stay with this work. Subscribe if you want more calm, disciplined Stoic clarity. Not noise. Not hype. Just principles you can live by.